Good afternoon, Bear Center visitors, and welcome to our daily 12:30 enrichment program. So, my name is Brinn. I'm a Northwoods Ecology intern here at the center for the summer. So today we're going to be talking a little bit more about some other animals that we have in the enclosure or that might interact with black bears. So right now, before we get started, we have our 9-year-old female, Holly. She has some enrichment here, and this is just to avoid what is called captivity psychosis. So this is when essentially captive animals aren't using their brains enough. They don't have to think about how they get their food. They don't have to figure anything out. And so we provide them with these toys every day. So that way they're always staying enriched and that they know how to use their brains, essentially. So if you are wondering where my voice is coming from, if you're here in the center, I am up on the observation deck, just to the right of the viewing windows. You're more than welcome to check Holly. And for our online visitors, thank you guys for tuning in. You're also every day at 12 at. So some of the other critters that around in the enclosure, we have quite a few. A lot of times we will see quite a few frogs, birds, squirrels, chipmunks, sometimes snakes, and we do have a couple of woodchucks that crawl around here as well. A lot of times the animals that we see interact with the bears the most typically are the ravens and some ground squirrels and chipmunks. Usually they can just be found scavenging through any of the scraps that the bears leave behind, which typically isn't a lot, but a lot of times they can find some leftover nuts or fruit, and they'll take it for themselves. Now, the bears are usually not very concerned with this. It's far too much energy to spend to chase them away, and so usually they are completely unfazed by them. The only time that they will get irritated by the presence of these squirrels is if they actually take their food from them. If this happens, usually they will swat at them, and sometimes we end up with a ground squirrel pancake, but they won't even eat them at that point. They will just take back whatever food item they stole in the first place. So really, they're not bothered by these guys being around. A lot of times, we will also see those chipmunks and squirrels actually digging through the bear scat. This is because after bears eat a ton of nuts and berries and fruits, things like that, once it passes through their body, a lot of times there are leftover seeds or nuts that weren't fully digested in that process. So they're still left there, and those squirrels will use it for their own food sources. And this is actually really, really helpful because it helps to redistribute all of those seeds and nuts, because most of those things that are buried by squirrels are actually forgotten. So sometimes these squirrels will steal these seeds and nuts, they'll take it for their own, and they'll try to dig a hole and cache it so they can come back to it later. But since they forget about it pretty often, or they can't remember exactly where they dug that hole, then those seeds are able to grow again since the squirrels already dug them. So they're able to produce more growth, and then that actually helps all of the other animals in the area as well, so they can keep coming back to those berries. A lot of times when the ravens are around, you can actually see them taking the shed from our bears. So all of our bears, except for Ted, are starting to shed now. You can see Holly is even looking a little bit scruffy. She's in the window here. You can see that she's got quite a bit of shed coming off of her, which is pretty normal. So they shed their winter coat, and then that helps them keep cool throughout the summer. And then it'll kind of grow back when they go back into hibernation. So as they shed, that can be a really helpful resource for birds. Typically, they'll take it to make their own nests and to make it nice and cozy and warm for any eggs that they have laid already. So it has happened before that those ravens will actually go right up to Ted Bear and take the shed off of his body before it's even shed. So if they see a loose tuft, they'll just take it for themselves, and Ted is much too slow to swat them away, so he just kind of deals with it. So that's a really great resource for those birds. Another bird that we see pretty often here in the enclosure are mallard ducks. We've had a couple visit us pretty regularly. We see them almost every day. Typically, we have 1 or 2 females, and we have seen a male accompany them as well. Again, our bears do not really care about their presence. They're pretty unfazed, but we have seen Lucky kind of spooking them for fun. It's happened a couple of times where they'll be in the pond, and Lucky will also be in the pond taking a nice little swim. and he'll pull out some reeds and throw them their way, or even go swim right up to them just to see them freak out and fly away. So he does have a little bit of fun with them. Sometimes the ducks will also lay eggs in the enclosure. When that happens, they do not last very long because any of our bears that stumble across those eggs are more than happy to have an extra little snack. Typically, bears do not eat meat. Black bears specifically do not really eat meat. 90% of their diet is made of vegetation, so fruits, nuts, berries, grasses, clover, things like that. And then that other 10% of protein is mostly made up of bug larvae and occasionally those ground nesting eggs as well. So a lot of times that will be waterfowl that have their nests on the ground near a water source. And for our bears, since we have that pond there, those mallards will sometimes come back to lay eggs. And then our bears will have that as a little treat. We do also have many places for the bears to access bug larvae in the enclosure. A lot of times it will be ants. So a lot of times those are within logs, under rocks, things like that. So our bears can sniff them out pretty easily. Their scent is estimated to be about 7 times greater than a bloodhound dog. It's one of the best in the animal kingdom. So they really have no problem figuring out where those nests are. And then they have specially adapted claws that are really easy to rip up those logs, turn over rocks, kind of dig through any soil to find those nests. So they're able to find the ant larvae. They're not interested in the ants themselves, really, but they're looking for those small eggs. Those are packed with protein, so it's a really great way to get some calories on. They will also go for hornets' nests to get into their larvae as well. So oftentimes, there's a big misconception that bears really love honey, and that's proven to be not really a primary food source for them. They're not too interested in the actual honey, but they are interested in that larva. So sometimes we will see some different kinds of hornets or wasps, even bees, in the enclosure, and they will make their own nests and their hives. And if they find them, they are able to get into that, and they get all of the larvae out. Usually, since they have a really thick layer of fur, they're also not bothered by those biting and stinging insects. Their fur keeps them really nice and safe from that because there's a couple of inches to get through. So most of those insects aren't able to penetrate that coat to actually get to their skin to sting them. So for the most part, they're incredibly unbothered by all of these pesky bugs swarming around them. They are also able to use cedar trees as kind of a natural insect repellent. So we have a couple of cedar trees in the enclosure and in their personal enclosures. And you can see the bark is kind of stripped off of them. So they can take the bark off of those trees, and with it will come all of that sap. And within that, they can kind of use it to put around their faces where there's not as much of that really thick fur protecting them. And that prevents those insects from landing on their face and biting them. So it's a really natural way for them to stay safe when they're hunting for that larva. They have to be pretty selective with how they spend their energy, since usually our bears will hibernate 5 to 7 months throughout the year. So they don't have a huge window of time to pack on the pounds and eat all of the food that they need in a full calendar year. So they have to be really selective with how they choose to access food. And that's why black bears are not known for hunting or fishing. Typically, they are built to be foragers rather than hunters. So a lot of times when we see them eating out in the enclosure, it'll be those in nuts and berries. We have a couple of strawberry bushes, raspberry. We have some beaked hazelnuts, which is also a favorite of theirs. And they'll even graze on soft grass and clover as well. There's quite a bit of clover up around the pond, so that's kind of a good place for them to get a little snack as well. Another critter that we can see these bears interact with pretty regularly is those woodchucks I was mentioning earlier. There's multiple of them in this enclosure, and usually they do not interact with the bears. Both of them are pretty non-confrontational animals. They're not looking for a fight or anything like that. That's not how they want to spend their time or their energy. So a lot of times we do have a little rock den up front by the pond, and that is where the woodchucks will spend most of the summer. But as we know, sometimes Tasha will use that as her hibernation den. So Tasha has started to dig in that den a little bit to prepare for hibernation. She's just getting ahead of the curve here. So when we see them interact, a lot of times the bears will actually be scared of the groundhogs. So they'll be in their den and they can get a little bit territorial. They have some pretty interesting vocalizations and they can be a little bit aggressive if something comes a bit too close. So it's not unheard of for the woodchucks to actually chase the bears out of that little den. Usually they kind of switch off who uses the den. So in the winter when our bears are hibernating in there, the woodchucks usually find another spot to hang out. And in the summertime, when our bears aren't really interested in that cave at all, then the woodchucks use it as their own little house. So typically all of the animals here in the enclosure get along pretty well and they coexist pretty peacefully with each other. Looks like we have a question here up on the deck. Great question. So somebody was wondering if we get monarchs up front where we have some milkweed here growing outside the viewing windows. So we definitely do. We have quite a few monarchs here. And we also have a pollinator garden up front outside of the building. So what we do is if there are monarch caterpillars on the milkweeds that are inside the enclosure, is once we have all bears in, we are free to go into the enclosure to do any maintenance or spreads or anything like that that we need to do. So then we'll also go and collect those caterpillars, and then we can safely transport them to the garden out front where there's no risk of any bears or other animals messing with them, running through the milkweed, and kind of disturbing their process as well. So caterpillars because it will hurt them as well. So that's a really great way that they can keep themselves safe. All right, I'm about to start wrapping things up. Holly is still making some quick time out of that cube that she has there. So as you can see, she just kind of has to manipulate it to get the food out. It's kind of like a little puzzle for them. So they're able to stay active both in their mind and their body and have a little bit of fun with it as well. So Holly will probably be up here for a little while longer so you guys can get a nice good look at her and her shaggy fur as she's shedding. But I want to thank you all for listening and visiting today. We really appreciate you guys taking your time to spend some time with us, learning about these bears and some other things about the Northwoods ecology here. So once again, my name is Brinn. I'm a summer intern here, and I'm just really excited to be able to help you guys learn about all of these wonderful animals that we have around us every day. So if you have any other questions, anybody here in a red vest is more than happy to help you out, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon.